session-based game modes from solo and party instances to battlegrounds and extraction missions. Core Punk also features deep character progression with 8 passive talent branches and weapon customization systems that let you create unique builds tailored to whatever your playstyle is. Crafting is robust, with early game materials staying relevant throughout the entire game, plus the combat has been finely tuned to deliver skill-based, responsive action that feels satisfying with every hit. With early access launching November 26th, you'll have access to 3 biomes, 12 worlds, 6 classes, with another one added monthly, and a ton of content. Best of all, Core Punk uses a buy-to-play model with cosmetic-only monetization, no pay-to-win nonsense, just a fun, fair experience for everybody. Early access launches November 26th. Use my link in the description below to register now. Let's help them make the game that we want to play. As more games have released as either live service games or platforms for future content, there is a growing concern of whether or not we are actually going to get money out of our purchases on these games and how easily players can be taken advantage of. Looking back at the past year with the release of Redfall, that was a game with a planned live service that had a roadmap for future DLC, and of course, as many games do, they tacked on a premium edition that promised more content in the future. The idea behind buying these season passes that are included with these games is so that the player can save money down the road and invest in a continued experience. I mean, it's the very reason why you're buying a game like this to begin with. You plan to continue to play it and not just play it a single time and walk away. So the question becomes, what happens when a game fails to follow through on that promise? Is there any contingencies in place, anything to protect the consumer? Well, in the case of Redfall, when they stopped development and they closed down the studio and shut down the servers, players who had purchased the season pass for the game had got a refund. They got their money back. However, this was them just doing good on the side of the players, not necessarily following an established rule that's put in place. And while some developers are going to respect that, not all have. In fact, I have been a victim of this. Going back to the release of Evolve back in 2015, they sold a bundled version of the game with the season pass, as well as selling it separately, and the game struggled to maintain a player base, and after a while they had a hard time even releasing new content. They ended up scrapping their model altogether and transitioned the game to free-to-play without offering any refunds for the base game or the season pass. Ultimately, the game was shut down soon after, but there are more examples throughout history that are just like this. PC Games End published an article written by Jamie Orr titled, "Valve's New Rules Will Finally Hold Season Pass DLC to Account." In a move to make sure that developers and publishers don't stray from their promises and commitments when it comes to season passes, Steam is tightening up their guidelines. Newly spotted documentation from Valve outlines how season passes must give a release date to all DLC included, describe what's in each piece of a DLC, and much more. A data mine earlier this year hinted that such a change was coming to Valve's storefront, and now it's official Steamworks documentation, which is essentially the handbook for anyone wanting to list their content on Steam, has now been updated with the new section dedicated to season passes. The brand new page clearly defines season passes as a purchasable item of DLC with the promise of future content to be delivered to customers, either as a separate DLC releases or as additional content is unlocked within the base game. Alongside some guidance of how to properly set up a season pass page on Steam, Valve issues several warnings and new rules about what's needed in a season pass system. The first big one revolves around the release schedule for season pass content. In the process of launching a season pass, you will be asked to commit to a launch timing for each content release in a season pass. That launch timing is a commitment to both customers and Steam. If you aren't ready to clearly communicate about the content included in each DLC and when each DLC will be ready for launch, you shouldn't offer a season pass on Steam. In the new guidance, which was spotted by Pavel Dudnik, the creator of the tracking site SteamDB, Valve also lays out its expectations when it comes to release schedules. Quarter of the year, i.e. January to March 2025, or season/year is acceptable. Of course, a date that's more precise is fine, i.e. June 2025 or June 1st, 2025. It also now adds that each piece of DLC content comes with a brief description of what's included. There is some wiggle room in that developers and publishers can self-reschedule the release date one time only if a piece of Season Pass content is going to be delayed. However, Valve also stipulates that they can only pick a new date that's up to 3 months later than what you originally selected. It also says that if a piece of DLC intended to be released in a Season Pass is canceled, customers will be offered a refund for the value of that individual piece of content. The refund promise may also be applied if a piece of DLC content is delayed by more than the 3-month threshold. Valve states that even if there has not yet been a customer complaint, Valve may take action if you delay a DLC more than 3 months beyond the release window you originally promised. Actions include removing the Season Pass from sale on Steam, refunding all customers who purchased the Season Pass for the value of the unreleased DLC, or allowing customers the option to refund the entire Season Pass. For the purposes of refunds, the value of unreleased DLC will be decided in a discussion with Valve. I absolutely love that line of if you're not ready to share details about that content, then you're not ready to sell it to the customer. There have been so many companies that have been the tail wagging the dog. They have all these grand designs for things that they're planning on doing in the future. They're giving all these empty promises to their audience, and they don't even know if they even have a game that's worth it in the first place. Look at that Unknown 9 game. They had an entire cinematic universe. They had a novel, a web series, a podcast, all kinds of other things that were planned, and they didn't even know if they had a game that players even wanted. Turns out, they didn't. Developers are going to hate this. Being held accountable not only with their reputation, but now also financially held accountable by Steam. If you don't deliver, we're going to refund it. I love it. Over the last few years, we've had so many issues where the players were the ones that were taking the brunt of these issues, their mistakes. We're the ones that have been held accountable for their mistakes because we paid for these things. And they are the ones that get to walk away from it in some cases. No more of that. No more appealing to our empathy because you can't deliver. Steam steps in front of it and says, no. If you can't make it on time, if you can't tell them what's in it, then you're not going to sell it. Or we're going to refund it. You know, I realize now that just recently Ubisoft said that they are not going to do a Season Pass model for Assassin's Creed Shadows, even though they were going to before this announcement took place. Coincidence? I think not. I love the idea of transparency and us being able to know what we're actually buying and when we're actually going to get it, because I want to have faith that I am going to get what I paid for. And a change like this helps make that happen. I love how much influence Steam has over their platform, but I don't really like how much influence they have over the entire industry. In this case, I do, because a change like this is actually going to protect consumers regardless of whatever platform they're on, just because of how popular Steam is. So many developers want to put their games on Steam, so they're going to have to, you know, stay copacetic no matter what platform they're on because they have to follow Steam's rules. You're not just going to do one thing on Steam and not do it for the other players, otherwise that's going to put you in a pretty sticky situation. And I think that's what a lot of these developers have been trying to avoid. They don't want to get sued for this kind of stuff because I don't think a lot of people realize this, but in a lot of cases with some of these laws, they don't become laws until somebody goes to court over it, and then a law gets created for it. And I think a lot of these developers are trying to avoid that because they like how under-regulated this industry is. You said it before, say it again. It's like the Wild West, and they get away with murder out here, and they're going to continue to until somebody else holds them accountable, and in this case, it's Steam. But there needs to be laws in place. Rules need to be stricter than they actually are right now, because in a lot of cases, we are not protected. And one of the issues that we're still facing today is the fact that we can buy something, and they can just take it away. With so many games going live service and continually updating themselves, one of my biggest concerns is the loss of content later on down the road, even though the game is still available. This has been a massive problem over the last few years and has been met with considerable pushback from the players. However, there is nothing that is standing in the way of developers continuing to take away what we paid for with no recourse. A great example of this issue is Destiny 2. Back in 2020, Bungie introduced the Destiny Content Vault, DCV, an initiative to manage the game's growing size by removing older content and make room for newer expansions. What made this especially controversial was the fact that it included content that players had paid for, like the Forsaken expansion. Forsaken was one of the most beloved expansions. It featured a campaign, it had locations like the Tangled Shore, and a fan-favorite raid in The Last Wish. When Bungie vaulted that content, players lost access to a product that they had spent money on, and there was no option for refunds or alternative access. Bungie justified the move by citing technical limitations, but to the players, this was just taking away something that you had already paid for, to give you more things for you to be able to pay for. The benefit here solely falls with the developer and not with the customer. What's wild about all of this is that soon after Bungie announced that they would no longer vault expansions following the backlash, but This was just them plainly admitting that it was never necessary in the first place. The vaulting of content, from my perspective, was nothing more than them fabricating a need to buy more content. It undermines the trust and highlights just how fragile the concept of ownership is in digital gaming. When you pay for content, you expect it to remain available as long as the game itself is online. But Destiny 2 proved that that's not a guarantee. Then we have Overwatch. Blizzard took things to a whole new level when they outright replaced the original